I've known Tom for as long as I can remember. We grew up together, went to the same schools, and shared the same group of friends. But while I always preferred sticking to the familiar, Tom had this insatiable curiosity that pushed him to explore the unknown, especially when it came to the internet. He was fascinated by the darkest corners of it, the places most people wouldn't dare venture. Conspiracy theories, obscure forums, and strange websites. Tom thrived on it all. He'd often tell me about the bizarre things he'd stumble across late at night. I'd listen, sometimes entertained, other times unnerved by how deep he was willing to go. I didn't share his curiosity, but I didn't judge him for it either. Everyone needs a hobby, right? But then, about a month ago, Tom mentioned something that felt different from his usual tales. We were hanging out at my place, just like any other weekend. He was on his laptop, his face illuminated by the eerie blue light of the screen, while I was half watching a movie. "Hey, check this out," he said, his voice tinged with something I couldn't quite place. Excitement, maybe? Or was it fear? I looked over, expecting to see some ridiculous conspiracy or another weird meme. Instead, I saw a website I'd never seen before. The layout was crude, almost unfinished, and the text was in a language I didn't recognize. There were strange symbols, flashing images, and a sense of wrongness that I couldn't shake off. "What is this?" I asked, leaning closer. "I don't know," Tom replied, his eyes fixed on the screen. "But it's different. There's something about it, something off. I've never seen anything like it." I felt a chill run down my spine. Tom had seen a lot, but for him to be this unsettled, that wasn't normal. "Maybe you should just close it," I suggested, trying to keep my voice light, but I couldn't hide the unease creeping into my thoughts. Tom just shook his head. "No way. I need to see where this goes." I didn't push him. I figured it was just another of his weird internet obsessions that would blow over in a week or two. But looking back, I wish I had, because that night was the beginning of something I couldn't have imagined in my worst nightmares. At first, I didn't think much of Tom's latest online obsession. He'd gone down strange rabbit holes before, spending hours on end delving into bizarre websites, only to emerge with some outlandish theory or another. It was just Tom being Tom. But this time, something was different. A few days after he found that site, I noticed he wasn't himself. Tom, who used to be the life of the party, the one who could talk about anything and everything, became disturbingly quiet. He stopped responding to texts, didn't show up to our usual hangouts, and even missed work a couple of times. When I did manage to get a hold of him, he seemed distracted, like he wasn't fully there. I went over to his place one evening, hoping to snap him out of whatever funk he was in. His apartment was dark when I arrived, the only light coming from the glow of his computer screen. Tom was sitting in front of it, hunched over, his eyes locked on whatever was on the monitor. He didn't even notice I was there until I called his name. "Tom," I said, stepping closer. "What the hell, man? You've been AWOL for days." He turned slowly, and when he finally looked at me, I could see the dark circles under his eyes, the haggard expression on his face. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "I'm fine," he muttered, his voice flat, emotionless. "Just busy." "Busy with what?" "That damn website." At the mention of the site, his expression changed. Fear flickered in his eyes for just a second before he quickly masked it. "You wouldn't understand," he said, turning back to the screen. "Then explain it to me." I pressed, genuinely concerned now. "What's so important about this site that you've practically gone off the grid?" He hesitated, and for a moment I thought he might actually open up, but then he just shook his head. "You wouldn't get it. I saw something I wish I hadn't." "What did you see?" I asked, my voice low, trying to keep the tension out of it. Tom just stared at the screen, his hands clenched into fists. "I can't talk about it. I don't want to talk about it." His response frustrated me, but more than that, it scared me. This wasn't the Tom I knew. The Tom I knew would never keep something like this from me. I tried to reach out, to get him to leave the computer, go out and get some fresh air, but he refused. He wouldn't leave that damn screen. Over the next week, it only got worse. Tom stopped answering his phone entirely. His social media went silent. Even his parents called me, worried that they hadn't heard from him. I went back to his apartment several times, but he never answered the door. I could hear the faint hum of his computer on the other side, the flicker of light through the curtains. But that was it. One night, desperate, I pounded on his door until my knuckles were sore. "Tom, open up, man. This isn't healthy. Whatever's going on, you can talk to me." But there was no answer, just that ominous silence, broken only by the faint sound of something clicking on the other side. I stood there for a long time, trying to decide if I should break down the door or call someone for help. But in the end, I just walked away, telling myself that he would come to his senses soon. I didn't realize how deep he had already sunk, and I had no idea how much deeper he would go before he disappeared entirely. It had been nearly 2 weeks since I last saw Tom, and I was beginning to think I'd never hear from him again. I tried everything, calling, texting, even getting in touch with his family to see if they'd had any luck. But Tom had cut himself off from the world, and no one knew why. I was starting to consider calling the police, or at least filing a missing persons report, when I got his message. It was late at night, and I was lying in bed, staring at my phone, wondering what else I could do to help him. That's when the notification popped up, a text from Tom. My heart skipped a beat as I fumbled to open it, relief flooding through me at the thought that maybe, finally, he was ready to talk. But when I opened the message, the relief turned to ice in my veins. "Don't come looking for me. It's too late. I've seen too much." I stared at the words, trying to make sense of them. The message was brief, but there was a desperation in it that I hadn't heard from Tom before. I quickly typed back, "Tom, what the hell are you talking about? Where are you? Let me help you." There was a pause, long enough that I thought he wouldn't respond. Then another message came through. "They know I'm talking to you. They're watching me. They've been watching since I found that site." My stomach twisted as I read the words. "Who's watching you? Tom, you're not making any sense." But instead of answering my questions, his messages became more frantic, more disjointed. "It's not just a website. It's something else. Something dark. It's alive, or it's connected to something alive. I can't explain it, but it's real, and it's coming for me." My mind raced as I tried to understand what he was saying. "Tom, you need to get out of there. Leave your apartment and come to my place. We can figure this out together." His reply came almost instantly, but this time it was just one word. "No." My frustration grew. "Why not? You're scaring me, man. Let me help you." There was another long pause before his final message arrived. It was the one that chilled me to my core. "You can't help me. I've already gone too far. Whatever you do, don't go to that site. Don't look for it. Don't try to understand. Just forget about me. Forget about all of this." And with that, Tom went silent. I tried calling him immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed his number, but there was no answer. I sent text after text, pleading with him to respond, to let me know where he was. But nothing came back. It was as if he had vanished, leaving only those haunting words behind. For hours, I sat in my darkened room, staring at the messages, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The Tom I knew wasn't paranoid or delusional. He was logical, rational. But something had broken him, something tied to that website. And the fear in his messages wasn't just the ramblings of a madman. It was real, palpable. I wanted to help him, but his warning echoed in my mind. Don't go to that site. But the more I thought about it, the more the curiosity gnawed at me. What could be so terrifying that it would make Tom, of all people, lose his grip on reality? What had he seen? I tried to push the thoughts away, to honor his last request and let it go. But deep down, I knew that wasn't going to happen. Tom was my friend, and I couldn't just walk away, even if it meant confronting whatever it was that had driven him to this point. Tom's final message haunted me for days. I tried to follow his advice, to let it go and move on, but I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his words burned into the darkness. Don't go to that site. But how could I just forget? Tom was still out there somewhere, alone and terrified, and I needed to understand what had happened to him. So, despite every warning he had given me, I made the decision to find the site. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing, not my friends, not my family. Deep down, I knew this was something I had to face alone. Part of me believed that if I could just see what Tom had seen, I might be able to save him, or at the very least, understand why he had fallen into this nightmare. It took hours of digging, retracing the steps Tom had likely taken. I went through old messages, searched obscure forums, and clicked on links I would never have dared to touch before. It felt like I was navigating a labyrinth, each turn leading me deeper into a world that felt increasingly disconnected from reality. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I found it. The website didn't have a name. It was a blank page with a single prompt asking for access, as if it was demanding some kind of password. I typed in a random phrase, half expecting it to reject me, but instead, the page flickered and I was in. The first thing that hit me was the sound, a low, droning hum that seemed to emanate from somewhere deep within the site. It wasn't loud, but it was relentless, a constant vibration that set my teeth on edge. The page itself was a mess of static, broken text and flashing images. There were symbols I didn't recognize, words and languages I couldn't read. It felt like the site was trying to communicate something, but the message was garbled, fractured. I clicked on one of the links at random, and the screen filled with a grotesque image. Something half-formed, like a figure caught in the middle of a scream, its face twisted in agony. I recoiled, but the image didn't go away. It just lingered there, as if it was waiting for me to do something. I quickly closed the window, but the image was burned into my mind. I could still see it, even when I looked away. My heart raced as I moved to the next page, hoping for some clue, some explanation for what this was. But the deeper I went, the worse it got. There were more images, horrifying, abstract shapes that seemed to pulse and writhe as I stared at them. And there were words, or what I thought were words, though they were scrambled and distorted. I tried to piece them together, but they made no sense. It was like the site was alive, taunting me, twisting reality around me. As I continued to explore, the hum grew louder, more insistent. I could feel it vibrating through my skull, shaking the very foundations of my thoughts. My vision blurred, and the room around me started to warp. The walls seemed to close in, the air thickening as if something unseen was pressing down on me. I tried to shake it off, to remind myself that it was just a website, just pixels on a screen. But it was more than that. I could feel it, the same dread that had driven Tom to the edge. It was creeping into my mind, into my very soul, wrapping around my thoughts like a vice. I lost track of time as I delved deeper, clicking on page after page, each one more disturbing than the last. There were videos, too, grainy and distorted, showing scenes that I couldn't fully comprehend. Flashes of faces, places that felt familiar but were wrong somehow, twisted and corrupted. And then, buried deep within the site, I found something that made my blood run cold. It was a message, hidden among the chaos, barely legible but unmistakable. It was from Tom. I warned you. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It was like he was speaking directly to me, as if he knew I would find this, that I would ignore his warnings. And then below the message, there was a link, pulsing slowly, almost inviting me to click it. My hand hovered over the mouse, trembling. I knew I should stop. I knew this was the point of no return. But something inside me, something darker than curiosity, urged me on. I clicked the link. The screen went black, and for a moment, I thought my computer had crashed. But then, slowly, an image began to fade in. It was a face, Tom's face, staring directly at me. But it wasn't the Tom I knew. His eyes were hollow, his expression twisted in terror and pain. And behind him, barely visible in the darkness, there was something else. Something monstrous. The screen flickered, and then everything went dark. The hum stopped, leaving me in silence. I sat there, staring at the blank screen, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt like I was on the verge of some terrible realization, but my mind refused to grasp it. Then, the computer powered down on its own, and the room was plunged into darkness. I sat there for a long time, too terrified to move, too shaken to think. Whatever I had seen, whatever I had uncovered, it had changed something inside me, and as the minutes ticked by, one thought began to rise above the rest. A realization that filled me with a dread I could barely comprehend. I had seen too much, and now, whatever had taken Tom was coming for me too. The next morning, I woke up on the floor, my body aching, my head pounding with a dull, relentless pain. The events of the night before felt like a nightmare, but the fear that gripped my chest told me it had been real. I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. Something was deeply, horribly wrong, and Tom was at the center of it. I tried calling him again, more out of desperation than hope, but as expected, there was no answer. His phone went straight to voicemail, the same cold, automated voice telling me to leave a message that would never be heard. I hung up, the emptiness in my gut growing heavier with every passing second. I knew what I had to do, even though every instinct in my body screamed at me to stay away. I had to go to Tom's apartment, to see for myself what had become of him. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had happened to him was about to happen to me, and I needed answers before it was too late. When I arrived at his building, the air felt thick, oppressive, like the entire world was holding its breath. I knocked on his door, harder and more frantically than before, but there was nothing, just the eerie silence that had taken over his life. With no other choice, I forced the door open. The lock gave way with a splintering crack, and I stumbled into the darkened apartment. The air inside was stale, the smell of dust and something else, something metallic, hung in the air. My stomach turned as I stepped further into the room. Tom's apartment looked almost exactly as I remembered it, but there was something off, something I couldn't quite place. The furniture was in the same place, his books still stacked haphazardly on the shelves. But it all felt wrong, as if everything was just slightly out of alignment with reality. Then I saw it. Tom's computer still on, the screen casting a sickly glow over the room. The same website was open, the images and symbols frozen in place, as if waiting for me to do something. The sight of it sent a shiver down my spine, but I forced myself to move closer. There was no sign of Tom. It was as if he had simply vanished, leaving behind only the computer and the unsettling evidence of his final moments. I called out his name, my voice shaking, but only the empty apartment answered me. I turned back to the computer, unable to resist the pull of the screen. The site was still active, the strange symbols and garbled text shifting slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if the website was alive, breathing. The sense of wrongness was overwhelming, pressing in on me from all sides. As I stared at the screen, I noticed something I hadn't before, a small, blinking cursor in the corner, waiting for a command. I hesitated, my heart racing, but I knew that whatever had happened to Tom was tied to this, to the site and the message it held. I reached for the keyboard, my fingers trembling, but before I could type anything, the screen flickered and the image of Tom's face appeared again, just as it had on my own computer the night before. His hollow eyes seemed to bore into me, pleading, warning, accusing, and behind him, that same monstrous presence lurked in the shadows, closer now, almost touching him. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat as the screen flickered again and then went black. The hum returned, louder this time, vibrating through my skull, filling my mind with a suffocating sense of dread. And then in the darkness of the screen, I saw something that made my blood run cold. My own reflection twisted distorted, as if something was watching me from the other side. I tried to pull away, but I was frozen in place, My eyes locked on the screen. I could feel it now, the same malevolent presence that had taken Tom. It was here, in the room with me, closing in, feeding off my fear. The computer flickered to life once more, but this time, it wasn't just Tom's face. It was mine too, staring back at me from the screen, our reflections merging into one twisted image. The symbols on the website began to shift and change, forming words that seared themselves into my mind. You should have listened. The screen went dark again, and this time, it stayed that way. The hum faded, leaving behind only the deafening silence of the empty apartment. I stood there, trembling, my mind reeling from what I had just witnessed. Tom was gone, completely and utterly, consumed by whatever dark force lived within that website. And now I knew it had its sights set on me. I fled the apartment, my heart pounding, but no matter how far I ran, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched, that something was following me, lurking just beyond the edges of my perception. I tried to forget, to move on, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that screen, those twisted reflections, and the message that had sealed my fate. Now, as I sit here, writing this, I can feel it closing in. The hum is back, louder than ever, vibrating through the walls, through my bones. I know it's only a matter of time before it takes me too, before I disappear, just like Tom. If you're reading this, heed my warning. Stay away from the site. Don't search for it. Don't give in to curiosity, because once it finds you, there's no escaping it.